The banker's wife looked at Martha Lancaster like she was something stuck to the bottom of her shoe, and Martha felt the familiar burn of shame crawl up her neck as she stood in the general store that sweltering August afternoon in 1878. 5 years married and still no children, Mrs. Henderson said loud enough for everyone browsing the aisles to hear. My grandmother always said a barren woman brings bad luck to a town. Martha's fingers tightened around the list of supplies she needed for the boarding house she ran with her husband, Daniel. She had heard variations of this cruelty for years now, ever since it became clear that children were not going to bless their marriage. Fort Yuma, California, was a small town along the Colorado River, and everyone knew everyone's business, especially the business of who could and could not conceive. I need 3 pounds of flour and some salt, Martha said quietly to Mr. Peterson behind the counter, ignoring the pointed stares from the other women gathered near the fabric section. Of course, Mrs. Lancaster, Mr. Peterson said kindly. He was one of the few people in town who did not treat her differently, though she caught his wife whispering about her often enough. Mrs. Henderson was not finished. It is unnatural, that is what it is. A woman's purpose is to bear children. What good is a wife who cannot fulfill even that basic duty? Martha's eyes stung, but she refused to cry in front of these women. She had cried enough tears in the privacy of her bedroom, had prayed enough prayers that seemed to go unanswered. Daniel told her it did not matter, that he loved her regardless, but she saw the way he looked at other men's children, the longing that flickered across his face before he remembered to hide it. My supplies, Mr. Peterson, Martha prompted. Right away, madam. As he wrapped her flour, the door to the general store swung open with enough force to make the bell overhead clang wildly. A man strode in, his boots heavy on the wooden floor, his dusty brown hat pulled low over his eyes. Martha recognized him instantly, even though he had only been in Fort Yuma for about 2 weeks. Tobias York, a cowboy who had taken work at the Stevens Ranch just outside of town. He was tall and lean, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. There was something quiet and steady about him, a calmness that seemed unusual for a drifter. Afternoon, Tobias said, nodding to Mr. Peterson. His gaze swept across the store and landed on Martha for just a moment before moving to Mrs. Henderson and the cluster of gossiping women. Mr. York, Mr. Peterson greeted. What can I get for you today? Need some tobacco and ammunition, .45 caliber. Mrs. Henderson had gone momentarily quiet with the arrival of a man, but she could not help herself for long. Mr. York, you are working out at the Stevens place, are you not? Such good people, and their children 3 beautiful boys, a real blessing from God. Tobias accepted the tobacco Mr. Peterson handed him, his expression unreadable. Children are fine, I suppose. Fine, Mrs. Henderson laughed, a harsh sound. They are everything. A legacy. A woman without children is like a tree without fruit, utterly useless. Martha flinched. She took her wrapped supplies from Mr. Peterson and counted out her coins with trembling fingers. That is a cruel thing to say, Tobias said suddenly, his voice cutting through the store like a knife. Everyone turned to stare at him. Mrs. Henderson's mouth fell open. I beg your pardon, I said, that is cruel. Tobias took his ammunition from Mr. Peterson and tucked it into his pocket. Judging a person's worth by something they cannot control. Where I come from, we measure people by their character, not their circumstances. Well, I never, Mrs. Henderson sputtered. Tobias turned to Martha, and for the first time she met his eyes directly. They were a startling blue-gray, like storm clouds over the desert. Madam, he said, tipping his hat to her. Then he walked out of the store, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Martha hurried out after him, not even sure why except that something pulled her forward. "Mr. York," she called. He stopped on the wooden sidewalk and turned. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the scar above his left eyebrow. He was probably in his late 20s, maybe 30 at most, only a few years older than her own 26 years. "Thank you," Martha said. "For what you said in there. You did not have to do that," Tobias shrugged. "I only spoke the truth. Those women have too much time on their hands and too little kindness in their hearts. You will make yourself unpopular defending someone like me. Someone like you." He studied her face. "You mean someone who runs a respectable boarding house and minds her own business. I have met worse people to defend." Martha felt something crack open inside her chest, some small space where hope had not completely died. "People talk," she said quietly, "about how I have been married 5 years without children. They say I am cursed, that I am not a real woman." The muscle in Tobias's jaw tightened. "That does not make you less a woman. Being able to have children or not have children does not define your worth. Anyone who says otherwise is a fool." The words landed on Martha like rain on parched earth. She had heard Daniel say similar things, but coming from this stranger, this cowboy who had nothing to gain from kindness, the words felt different. True in a way she had forgotten truth could feel. "I should get back," Martha said, though she found herself reluctant to leave. "My husband will wonder where I am." "Of course," Tobias said. He tipped his hat again. "Good day, Mrs. Lancaster." She watched him walk toward the stable where his horse was tied, his gait easy and unhurried despite the heat that shimmered off the dusty street. Then she turned and made her way back to the boarding house, Mrs. Henderson's poison feeling just a little less potent than it had an hour before. The Lancaster boarding house sat at the edge of Fort Yuma's Main Street, a 2-story building with a wide porch and rooms that Martha kept meticulously clean. She and Daniel had 6 boarders at the moment, mostly men working temporary jobs in the area. Martha did all the cooking and cleaning, and Daniel handled the books and maintenance. It was a good life, or it should have been. But the shadow of childlessness hung over everything, turning what should have been contentment into a constant reminder of what they lacked. Daniel was in the kitchen when Martha returned, reviewing the ledger. He looked up and smiled, his gentle face creasing with warmth. "Did you get everything we needed?" "Yes," Martha said, setting her packages on the counter. "And I had another encounter with Mrs. Henderson." Daniel's smile faded. "What did she say this time?" "The usual, that I am barren and useless." Martha started unpacking the flour, focusing on the task so she would not have to see the pain in her husband's eyes. "But someone defended me. That new cowboy, Tobias York." "Did he?" Daniel closed the ledger. "That was kind of him. He said being childless does not make me less a woman." Daniel came around the table and took Martha's hands. "I have been telling you that for years." "I know." Martha squeezed his hands. "I am sorry, Daniel. I know you wanted children." "I want you to be happy," Daniel said. "That is what I want." But they both knew happiness was a complicated thing when everyone around you saw you as incomplete, as failed. Martha kissed her husband's cheek and set about preparing supper for their boarders, trying to push Mrs. Henderson's words and Tobias York's storm cloud eyes out of her mind. Over the next few weeks, Martha saw Tobias in town regularly. He always nodded to her politely, sometimes tipped his hat, but did not seek her out for conversation. She found herself looking for him, though, watching for that tall figure in the dusty brown hat. It was not attraction, she told herself. She was a married woman. It was simply gratitude for his kindness. But then came the evening in late September when Tobias showed up at the boarding house looking for a room. Martha answered his knock, surprised to find him standing on her porch with his saddlebags over his shoulder. "Mr. York," she said. "Mrs. Lancaster. I apologize for the late hour." I am looking for a room if you have one available. The bunkhouse at the Stevens Ranch is overcrowded, and I would prefer something quieter." "Of course. Come in." Martha stepped aside, very aware of how her heart had started beating faster. "We have a room on the second floor. $3 a week includes meals." "That sounds fine." Daniel came out of the sitting room and Martha introduced the two men. They shook hands, sizing each other up the way men did. "Welcome to our home," Daniel said. "My wife runs a good house. You will be comfortable here." "I am sure I will be," Tobias said. Martha showed him upstairs to the empty room at the end of the hall. It was small but clean, with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. "Supper is at 6, breakfast at 7, Martha said. "I will put fresh water in the pitcher every morning." "Thank you, Mrs. Lancaster." Tobias set his saddlebags on the bed. "I appreciate your hospitality." Martha nodded and retreated downstairs, feeling oddly flustered. Having Tobias under her roof felt dangerous somehow, though she could not articulate why. He was just another boarder. She had housed dozens of men over the years without incident. But Tobias York was different. She noticed it at supper that first evening, the way he spoke carefully and listened more than he talked. The other boarders were a rough bunch, miners and ranch hands who ate quickly and told crude jokes. Tobias was polite to them but kept himself apart, and Martha caught him watching her several times as she served the food, his expression thoughtful. After the meal, as Martha was clearing plates, Tobias carried his own dish to the kitchen. "You do not have to do that," Martha said. "My mother taught me to clean up after myself," Tobias said. "She would haunt me if I forgot." "Is she?" Martha hesitated. "Dead, yes, 5 years now. My father, too, cholera outbreak in Texas." "I am sorry." Tobias leaned against the counter, and Martha was aware of how close he was in the small kitchen, how she could smell leather and sage and something uniquely him. "You have family, Mrs. Lancaster." "My parents are back east. We write letters, but I have not seen them in years." Martha scrubbed at a plate. "They wanted me to marry someone from our town, someone more prosperous than Daniel. They were disappointed in my choice." "Why did you choose him?" The question was forward, but Tobias asked it gently. Martha found herself answering honestly. "Because he was kind. Because he made me laugh. Because when I was with him, I felt like I could breathe. Those seem like good reasons to marry someone." "I thought so." Martha set the clean plate aside. "But kindness does not produce children, apparently." Tobias was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I had a sister. She was married for 10 years and never had children. Her husband's family treated her terribly because of it. She took her own life when she was 32. Martha's hand stilled in the dishwater. "Oh, Tobias, I am so sorry." Her name was Anna. "She was the best person I ever knew, kind and funny and smart. But she let those people convince her she was worthless." His voice was rough. "So when I hear women like Mrs. Henderson spewing that poison, it makes me angry, because words have power. They can kill just as surely as a bullet." Martha turned to face him, her hands dripping soap. "I have thought about it," she admitted in a whisper. "About whether life is worth living when everyone sees you as defective, when you see yourself that way." Tobias reached out and touched her arm just briefly. "You are not defective, Martha. You are a complete person exactly as you are. Do you hear me?" She nodded, her throat tight. They stood there in the kitchen, something electric passing between them, and then Daniel's footsteps sounded in the hallway and Tobias stepped back. "I will let you finish up," Tobias said, his voice carefully neutral again. "Good night, Mrs. Lancaster." "Good night, Mr. York." After he left, Daniel came into the kitchen. "He seems like a decent fellow," he said. "Yes," Martha agreed, returning to her dishes. "Decent." But as she lay in bed that night beside her sleeping husband, Martha found herself thinking about Tobias York's storm-cloud eyes and the understanding she had seen there. She told herself it meant nothing. It could not mean anything. She was married, and she loved Daniel, even if that love had become quiet and companionable rather than passionate. Still, something had shifted. Something had awakened. The months that followed were a special kind of torture for Martha. Having Tobias in the house meant seeing him every day, sharing meals, passing each other in the hallway. He was unfailingly polite, never stepping over the invisible line that separated them. But Martha felt the pull between them growing stronger, a magnetic force that terrified her. She was a good woman. She had always been faithful to Daniel, but she found herself thinking about Tobias constantly, wondering about his life, noticing the way his hands looked when he held his coffee cup, the sound of his laughter when one of the other boarders told a joke. Daniel noticed nothing, or if he did, he said nothing. He was busy with the boarding house and with his volunteer work at the small church on the edge of town. Martha loved him, she did. But being around Tobias made her realize how much of herself she had buried over the years, how small and careful she had become. In November, the annual Fort Yuma harvest celebration took place in the town square. There was music and dancing, food and whiskey. Martha and Daniel attended, as they did every year, and Martha wore her best dress, a deep green cotton that brought out the gold in her brown hair. She was standing with Daniel near the punch bowl when Tobias appeared, looking uncomfortable in the crowd. He had shaved and put on a clean shirt, and Martha's breath caught at how handsome he looked. "Evening, Mr. and Mrs. Lancaster," Tobias said. "Evening, Mr. York," Daniel replied. "Fine night for a celebration." "It is." Tobias looked at Martha. "Would you care to dance, Mrs. Lancaster?" "With your husband's permission, of course." Martha's heart hammered. She looked at Daniel, who smiled and nodded. "Of course. Go on, Martha. I need to speak with Reverend Harris anyway." So Martha found herself taking Tobias's hand and letting him lead her to the area where couples were dancing to a fiddler's lively tune. His hand settled on her waist, and she placed hers on his shoulder, and they began to move together. "You look beautiful tonight," Tobias said quietly. Martha knew she should not let him say such things, but she was starving for them. "Thank you. You look very handsome." They danced in silence for a minute, and then Tobias said, "This is torture, you know." "What is?" "Living in your house, seeing you every day, knowing I cannot have you." Martha stumbled, and Tobias's arm tightened to steady her. "Tobias," she whispered, "you cannot say things like that. I know, I am sorry, but it is the truth." His eyes searched hers. "Tell me you do not feel it too, and I will never speak of it again." Martha wanted to lie. She should lie. But instead she said, "I feel it. God help me, I feel it." Tobias's jaw clenched. "What are we going to do?" "Nothing. We are going to do nothing." Martha forced herself to meet his gaze. "I am married. I made vows. Daniel is a good man who does not deserve to be betrayed." "I know he is." "That is what makes this so damn difficult." The song ended and they separated. Martha's hands were shaking. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. York." "Martha," Tobias said, his voice low and urgent, "if things were different, if you were not married, would there be a chance for us?" She should say no. She should walk away. But Martha had spent 5 years being told she was inadequate, being made to feel less than whole, and here was a man who looked at her like she was everything. "Yes," she whispered, "if things were different." Then she turned and walked back to Daniel, leaving Tobias standing alone in the crowd. That night, lying beside her husband in the darkness, Martha made a decision. She could not continue like this, caught between loyalty and longing. She would ask Tobias to leave, to find another place to board. It was the only way to protect her marriage, to protect all of them. But before she could act on that decision, everything changed. It was a cold morning in early December when Martha woke feeling ill. She barely made it to the wash basin before she was sick, retching violently. Daniel woke and rushed to her side, holding her hair back from her face. "Martha, what is wrong?" "I do not know. My stomach feels terrible." It continued for a week, the morning nausea that left her weak and dizzy. Daniel wanted to fetch the doctor, but Martha refused, certain it would pass. But then she noticed other changes. Her breasts were tender. Her monthly courses, which had always been irregular, were late, very late. She refused to let herself hope. Hope had disappointed her too many times before. But when another week passed and the symptoms continued, Martha finally went to see Dr. Wilson, the elderly physician who had practiced in Fort Yuma for 30 years. He examined her carefully, asked her questions, and then smiled. "Mrs. Lancaster, you are pregnant." "I would estimate about 2 months along." Martha sat frozen on the examination table. "That is not possible. We have tried for 5 years. Sometimes these things happen when we least expect them. Your body has decided the time is right." Dr. Wilson patted her hand. "Congratulations, my dear. You are going to be a mother." Martha walked home in a daze. Pregnant. After all this time, all the prayers and tears and shame, she was finally pregnant. She should be overjoyed. Daniel would be ecstatic. This was everything they had wanted. But as she entered the boarding house and saw Tobias sitting in the parlor reading a newspaper, a terrible thought occurred to her. When had she conceived? She counted backward, trying to remember, and her blood ran cold. 2 months ago would have been early October. And in early October, there had been one night when Daniel had been ill with a stomach ailment, when Martha had brought Tobias his supper on a tray because he was working late. One night when Tobias had caught her hand and held it for just a moment too long, and Martha had felt the full weight of her longing crash over her like a wave. Nothing had happened. They had not touched beyond that brief contact, but Martha's mind spun with doubt and fear. What if somehow, impossibly, this child was not Daniel's? What if her feelings for Tobias had somehow manifested in the worst possible way? She knew it was irrational. She had not been unfaithful. She had only held Tobias's hand. But guilt was a powerful thing, and Martha felt it suffocating her. "Martha," Tobias stood, concern creasing his face. "Are you all right? You look pale." "I am fine," she managed. "Where is Daniel?" "He went to the market. He should be back soon." Martha nodded and hurried upstairs to her room before Tobias could ask more questions. She sat on the bed, her hands pressed to her still flat stomach, and tried to steady her breathing. She was being ridiculous. This baby was Daniel's. Of course it was Daniel's. She had been faithful. But the shame she felt was real, because even if she had not betrayed her husband with her body, she had betrayed him with her heart. When Daniel returned, Martha told him the news. His reaction was everything she had hoped for. He swept her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time, and told her she had made him the happiest man alive. That night he cooked dinner for her, insisted she rest, and talked excitedly about baby names and cradles and all the things they would need. Martha smiled and nodded and felt like a fraud. Over the next few weeks, word spread through Fort Yuma that Martha Lancaster was expecting. The women who had shamed her for years suddenly treated her differently, as though pregnancy had finally granted her entry into their exclusive club. Mrs. Henderson actually congratulated her at church, though Martha saw the calculating look in the older woman's eyes, as if she were trying to figure out what had changed. Tobias said nothing about the pregnancy directly, but Martha caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not read. Was it longing? Regret? Jealousy? She could not tell, and she was afraid to ask. The situation became unbearable after Christmas. Martha's stomach was starting to show, a small bump that Daniel loved to place his hand on while they lay in bed. And every time he did it, Martha felt the gulf between them growing wider, because she could not shake the feeling that she had betrayed him, even though her betrayal existed only in her heart. Finally, on a cold January evening in 1879, Martha could not stand it anymore. She found Tobias in the stable behind the boarding house, grooming his horse in the dim light of a lantern. "Tobias," she said, "we need to talk." He turned, his expression wary. "About what?" "About this impossible situation." Martha wrapped her shawl tighter around herself. "About how I am having my husband's baby while feeling things for you that I have no right to feel." Tobias set down the curry brush and faced her fully. "I am glad you are having a baby, Martha. I know how much you wanted one. I know what it means to you." "Do you?" Her voice broke. "Do you know how guilty I feel? How every time Daniel touches me I think about you, how wrong that is." "Then tell me to leave," Tobias said roughly. "Tell me to go and I will. I will leave Fort Yuma tonight and you will never see me again." Martha opened her mouth to do exactly that. It was the sensible thing, the right thing, but instead she said, "I do not want you to go." "Then what do you want?" "I do not know," Martha whispered. "I love Daniel. He is my husband and he has stood by me through everything. But when I am with you, I feel alive in a way I have not felt in years, and I hate myself for it." Tobias crossed the stable floor and stood before her. He did not touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I fell in love with you the day I saw you in that general store, enduring that woman's cruelty with your head held high. I tried not to. I tried to keep my distance. But loving you is like breathing. I cannot stop." Tears spilled down Martha's cheeks. "This cannot happen, Tobias. We cannot be together, I know." "Then what do we do?" Tobias reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. It was the most intimate touch they had shared, and it felt more significant than a kiss. "We survive," he said quietly. "We do the honorable thing. I will leave Fort Yuma after the baby is born. I will go somewhere far away where I cannot torment you anymore, and you will raise your child with Daniel and be happy. That is what we do." "I do not think I can be happy without you," Martha said, the words torn from her. "You will learn how. For your child, for Daniel, for yourself." Tobias dropped his hand. "I should not have touched you, that was wrong. Everything about this is wrong." "No," Tobias said firmly, "loving someone is never wrong. What we choose to do with that love can be wrong, but the feeling itself is just the truth. And the truth is I love you, Martha Lancaster. I will love you until the day I die. But I will not destroy your marriage or your happiness. So I will leave and you will forget me. I will never forget you. Then remember me kindly." Tobias's voice was rough with emotion. "Remember that I wanted nothing but the best for you." Martha nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Then she turned and fled back to the house, back to the safety of her marriage and the promise of the child growing inside her. But fate had other plans. 2 weeks later, Daniel collapsed while carrying firewood into the kitchen. Martha screamed for help, and Tobias came running. They carried Daniel up to bed and Dr. Wilson was summoned. The diagnosis was grim. A weak heart, something Daniel had never mentioned and may not have known about. "He needs rest," Dr. Wilson said. "Complete bed rest, no exertion at all, and even then I cannot promise you how much time he has." Martha felt the world tilt beneath her feet. How much time? It could be weeks. It could be months. "I am sorry, Mrs. Lancaster. You need to prepare yourself." Daniel knew. Martha could see it in his eyes when the doctor left and she sat beside his bed holding his hand. "I am dying," Daniel said calmly. "Do not say that. You are going to rest and get better." "Martha," he squeezed her hand. "We both know the truth, and there is something I need to tell you before I go. Daniel, please listen to me." His voice was weak but determined. I know you have feelings for Tobias York. I have known for months, and I am not angry. Martha's breath caught. Daniel, we never. I know you did not betray me. You are too good for that. Daniel smiled sadly. But I am not blind. I see the way you look at each other. The way you come alive when he is around. And I understand why. I have not been the husband you needed, Martha. I have been distant and preoccupied, and I let this town's cruelty hurt you instead of protecting you from it. That is not true. You have been wonderful. I have been adequate. Daniel coughed, his face paling. But Tobias York looks at you like you hung the moon, and you deserve to be looked at that way. I do not want to talk about this, Martha said, tears streaming down her face. I want you to rest and get better. I want you to promise me something. Daniel's grip tightened. When I am gone, if Tobias is still here, if he still wants you, I want you to let yourself be happy. Do not mourn me forever. Take the love that is offered to you. I cannot promise that. Promise me, Martha, please. Let me die knowing you will have someone to take care of you and our child. Martha sobbed. Our child should have his father. Our child will have Tobias. He is a good man. I trust him. Daniel's eyes were closing, exhaustion taking over. Promise me. I promise, Martha whispered. Though the words felt like betrayal, Daniel lingered for 6 more weeks. Tobias helped Martha care for him, lifting him when he needed to be moved, sitting with him so Martha could rest. The two men talked sometimes, conversations Martha was not privy to. She wondered what they said to each other, these two men who both loved her in their different ways. On a cold morning in March, with the first hints of spring appearing in the desert, Daniel Lancaster died in his sleep. Martha was beside him, her hand in his, and Tobias was in the doorway. Daniel's last words were, "Thank you for loving her." Martha did not know if he was speaking to her or to Tobias. The funeral was well attended. Even Mrs. Henderson came, though Martha suspected it was more for appearances than genuine grief. Martha stood at the graveside, 4 months pregnant and hollow with loss, and felt like her life had been torn apart. After the service, as people filed back to the boarding house for the traditional meal, Tobias approached her. "What do you need, Martha?" "I need Daniel back," she said numbly. "I need none of this to have happened." "I know, I am so sorry." Martha looked up at him, this man she loved and resented in equal measure. "He knew about us, about how we felt." "I know, he told me." "What else did he tell you?" Tobias hesitated. "He asked me to take care of you after he was gone. He asked me to be a father to your child." Martha felt anger flare through her grief. "He had no right to ask that. You are not obligated to us." "I know I am not obligated, but Martha, I would consider it an honor." "An honor." Martha laughed bitterly. "To raise another man's child out of pity, not pity. Love." Tobias stepped closer. "I love you, I told you that. And that does not change just because Daniel is gone. If anything, it becomes more important. You need someone, Martha. You cannot run this boarding house alone, especially not with a baby coming. So this is about practicality. No, this is about the fact that I want to spend every day of my life with you, that I want to wake up next to you and fall asleep holding you. That I want to be there when your baby is born and watch them grow up. That is what this is about." Martha wanted to collapse into his arms, to let him carry the weight she had been bearing alone, but it felt wrong, too soon, disrespectful to Daniel's memory. "I cannot think about this right now." "Then do not think. Just let me help you. Let me be here." So Tobias stayed. He moved from his room upstairs into the small bedroom off the kitchen that had been used for storage, insisting it would be improper for him to be anywhere near Martha's bedroom while she was still mourning. He ran the boarding house with quiet efficiency, managing the books and the boarders and the endless maintenance that Daniel had handled. And he took care of Martha, making sure she ate and rested and did not work herself to exhaustion. The town gossips had a field day, of course. Martha heard the whispers, saw the sideways glances. A widow and her male boarder living under the same roof. It was scandalous. But Martha found she did not care any more what Mrs. Henderson and her ilk thought. She had lost too much to worry about their small-minded judgments. As her pregnancy progressed, Martha found herself relying on Tobias more and more. He was patient when her emotions swung wildly, kind when she snapped at him for no reason, strong when she felt weak. And slowly, carefully, Martha let herself love him openly instead of hiding it like a shameful secret. In late May, on a blazing hot afternoon that made the air shimmer with heat, Martha went into labor. Tobias rode for Dr. Wilson, and then paced the hallway downstairs while Martha labored upstairs, attended by the doctor and Mrs. Chen, the midwife who had delivered half the babies in Fort Yuma. It was a long, difficult birth. Martha screamed until her voice was raw, certain she would die, that the baby would die, that this was punishment for her sins. But finally, as the sun was setting and painting the sky orange and pink, a baby's cry filled the air. "A boy, Doctor," Wilson announced, placing the squirming infant on Martha's chest. A healthy boy. Martha looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy. He had dark hair and Daniel's nose and a set of lungs that could wake the dead. "Hello," she whispered. "Hello, little one. Have you chosen a name?" Mrs. Chen asked as she cleaned the baby. Martha had. She and Daniel had discussed names in the early weeks of her pregnancy before he got sick. If it was a boy, Daniel wanted him named after his father. "Matthew," Martha said. "His name is Matthew." Later, after Dr. Wilson and Mrs. Chen had left and Martha was cleaned and resting in fresh sheets, Tobias knocked softly on her door. "Can I come in?" "Yes." He entered hesitantly, this strong cowboy suddenly uncertain in the presence of a newborn. Martha smiled. "Come meet Matthew." Tobias approached the bed and looked down at the sleeping baby in Martha's arms. Something shifted in his face, an expression of such profound tenderness that Martha's heart ached. "He is beautiful," Tobias whispered. "He looks like you. He looks like Daniel. He looks like both of you. Like the best of both of you." Tobias reached out one calloused finger and gently touched Matthew's tiny hand. The baby's fingers curled reflexively around it, and Tobias made a sound that was almost a laugh, almost a sob. "Hello, Matthew. It is good to finally meet you." Martha watched Tobias with her son and felt something settle into place inside her. This was right. This was what Daniel had wanted for them, what he had given them permission to have. A family, a life, love. "Tobias," she said softly, "would you like to hold him?" Tobias looked terrified. "I might drop him." "You will not drop him. Here, sit down." Martha waited while Tobias settled gingerly into the chair beside the bed, then carefully transferred the sleeping baby into his arms. Tobias held Matthew like he was made of glass, his eyes wide with wonder. "I have never held a baby before," he admitted. "You are doing perfectly." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. "You are going to be wonderful at this." Tobias looked up at her, understanding the deeper meaning behind her words. "Are you sure, Martha? I do not want to rush you." "Daniel has only been gone 2 months. I know, and I will always love him, always." Martha reached out and touched Tobias's face. "But he wanted us to be together. He gave us his blessing, and I am tired of fighting what I feel. I love you, Tobias York. I have loved you for a long time. And I want you in my life, in Matthew's life, if you still want us." "If I still want you," Tobias laughed, the sound shaky. "Martha, I will want you until the day I die and probably beyond that. You and Matthew, you are everything to me. Then stay, not as a boarder, as my partner. As Matthew's father. As my husband eventually, when enough time has passed that the town will not run us out on a rail." Tobias shifted Matthew carefully so he could reach for Martha's hand. "I will stay. For as long as you will have me. Forever if you will let me." Martha laced her fingers through his. "Forever sounds about right." They sat like that for a long time, the three of them, as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear over the desert. It was not the life Martha had imagined when she married Daniel 5 years ago. It was not the happy ending she had prayed for in all those bitter years of childlessness and shame. But it was real. It was honest. It was theirs. The next months passed in a blur of sleepless nights and baby cries and endless feedings. Tobias proved to be a natural with Matthew, walking him when he was fussy, changing his diapers without complaint, singing him cowboy songs in his rough voice. Martha watched them together and fell more in love with Tobias every day. The town gossips eventually found new scandals to occupy their attention. Martha and Tobias maintained separate bedrooms and behaved with perfect propriety, so there was nothing concrete for the busybodies to latch on to. And Matthew was such a beautiful, healthy baby that even Mrs. Henderson could not resist cooing over him when they crossed paths. As summer turned to autumn, Martha and Tobias settled into a rhythm. They ran the boarding house together, a true partnership. In the evenings, after the boarders were fed and Matthew was asleep, they would sit on the porch and talk about their days, about their pasts, about their dreams for the future. One cool October evening, exactly a year after the day they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other, Tobias took Martha's hand and said, "I think enough time has passed. Will you marry me, Martha Lancaster?" Martha's heart swelled. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in November by Reverend Harris in the small church where Daniel was buried. Martha wore a simple blue dress and carried wildflowers. Tobias wore his best shirt and looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. Matthew, now 6 months old and chubby-cheeked, gurgled happily through the ceremony from Mrs. Chen's arms. There were people who disapproved, of course. People who whispered that Martha had moved on too quickly, that there was something unseemly about the whole situation. But there were also people who wished them well, who saw how much they loved each other, who understood that life was short and happiness hard-won. After the ceremony, as they walked back to the boarding house together, Tobias carrying Matthew and Martha holding Tobias's arm, Martha felt something she had not felt in years, complete. Not because she had a husband or a child, not because she had finally met society's expectations, but because she was with people who loved her exactly as she was. "Are you happy?" Tobias asked, as if reading her mind. "Yes," Martha said simply. "I am happy." That night, for the first time, Martha and Tobias shared a bed as husband and wife. They made love slowly, tenderly, learning each other's bodies with patience and care. And when Tobias held Martha afterward, his hand resting on her stomach, she felt a sense of rightness that went bone deep. "Thank you," Martha whispered into the darkness. "For what? For seeing me when everyone else looked through me, for telling me I was not less a woman, for loving me." Tobias kissed her forehead. "Thank you for letting me, for giving me this life I never dared to hope for." They lay there in comfortable silence until Matthew's cry pierced the night. Both of them groaned and then laughed. Tobias started to get up, but Martha stopped him. "I will get him. You got him the last 2 times." She padded into the nursery and lifted her son from his cradle. As she settled into the rocking chair to feed him, she looked out the window at the star-filled sky over Fort Yuma. Somewhere up there, she liked to think Daniel was watching, satisfied that his family was being cared for. The years that followed were full and rich. Matthew grew into a bright, energetic boy who had his mother's stubbornness and his father's gentleness. Martha and Tobias ran the boarding house successfully, building a reputation for good food and clean rooms. They weathered hard times and celebrated good times together. When Matthew was 2, Martha discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no shame, no fear, only joy. Tobias was ecstatic, and when their daughter was born the following spring, he cried when he held her for the first time. "A girl," he said in wonder. "We have a girl." "We have Anna," Martha said, because they had already chosen the name, honoring Tobias's lost sister. "We have Anna York." Little Anna had Tobias's blue-gray eyes and Martha's smile, and she completed their family in a way that felt like destiny. Matthew was a devoted big brother, always wanting to hold his sister, to show her things, to protect her. As the children grew, Martha made sure they knew the truth about their family. She told Matthew about Daniel, about the man who had been his first father, who had loved him even before he was born. And she told both children about how she and Tobias had found each other, about the power of kindness and the importance of seeing people's worth beyond society's narrow definitions. "Your mother was shamed for years because she could not have children," Tobias told them one evening when Matthew was 8 and Anna was 6. They were sitting around the dinner table, and somehow the conversation had turned to how Martha and Tobias met. People in this town were cruel to her. They told her she was not a real woman because she was childless. "That is stupid," Anna declared with all the certainty of a 6-year-old. "Mama is the best woman in the world," Tobias smiled. "I agree, and that is what I told her when I first met her. I said that being childless does not make you less a woman, that her worth was not defined by whether or not she could have babies." Martha reached across the table and squeezed Tobias's hand. Even after all these years, the memory of those words still moved her. "Your father saved me," she told the children. "Not by solving my problem, but by helping me see myself differently, by reminding me that I was valuable just as I was. And then you had me," Matthew said proudly, "so those people were wrong." "They were wrong either way," Martha corrected gently. "I was valuable before I had you, and I was valuable after. Having children is wonderful, but it does not determine your worth as a person." "Why were people so mean?" Anna asked. It was a question Martha and Tobias had struggled with themselves. "Because sometimes people are afraid of anything different," Tobias said, "and instead of being kind, they lash out. They try to make themselves feel better by making others feel worse." "That is still stupid," Anna said. "Yes," Martha agreed, "it is." As the children ran off to play, Tobias pulled Martha into his arms. "You are an amazing mother," he said. "And an amazing woman, I hope you know that." "You tell me often enough," Martha said, smiling. "But I never get tired of hearing it." "Good, because I am never going to stop saying it." They kissed, comfortable and familiar after years of marriage, and Martha thought about how far she had come. From the shamed, childless woman standing in the general store to this. A full life, a loving family, a partnership built on respect and tenderness. Mrs. Henderson had passed away 2 years earlier, and at her funeral, Martha had felt more pity than anger. The old woman had lived a life focused on judging others, on enforcing rigid rules about what made someone valuable. And she had died bitter and alone, her own children barely visiting her in her final years. Martha's life was so different. Her home was filled with laughter and love. Her children were healthy and happy. Her husband looked at her every day like she was the answer to every question he had ever asked. One evening in 1886, when Matthew was 7 and Anna 5, Martha stood on the porch of the boarding house watching the sunset paint the sky over Fort Yuma. Tobias came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against his chest. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About how grateful I am for you, for our children, for this life." "I am the grateful one," Tobias said. I was just a drifter with nothing to my name until I met you. You gave me a home, a family, a reason to stay in one place." Martha turned in his arms to face him. "You gave me something too. You gave me back my sense of self-worth. You made me believe I was valuable." "You were always valuable, Martha. I just helped you see it." They stood there together as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from pain and shame and loss. Inside the house, they could hear Matthew reading to Anna, his voice serious and careful as he sounded out the words. It was a sound that never failed to make Martha smile. "You think Daniel would be happy?" Martha asked quietly, "with how things turned out?" "I know he would be," Tobias said without hesitation. "He loved you enough to want you to be happy, even if it meant losing you. That is the truest kind of love there is." Martha thought about Daniel often, keeping his memory alive for Matthew, making sure their son knew about the gentle man who had been his father for the brief time before his birth. But the grief had softened over the years, transforming from sharp pain to gentle melancholy. She could remember Daniel now with gratitude instead of sorrow. "I loved him," Martha said, "but I love you too. Both things can be true at the same time." "I know," Tobias said, "and I am grateful that you chose to love me after everything. That you let me into your life when it would have been easier to shut everyone out." "It would not have been easier," Martha corrected. "It would have been lonelier. You made me brave enough to risk loving again." They went inside together, joining their children in the warm, lamp-lit kitchen. Matthew had finished his reading and was begging for cookies. Anna was singing a song she had learned at school, something about mockingbirds and diamond rings. This was Martha's life now. Not the one she had imagined in her youth, not the one the town had told her she should want, but hers nonetheless. Hard-won and precious and real. Years later, when Matthew was grown and working as a lawyer in San Francisco, and Anna was teaching at the Fort Yuma school, Tobias and Martha would sit on their porch in the cooling evening air and talk about all they had experienced together. "You remember that day in the general store?" Martha asked one evening when they were both in their 50s, gray-haired and weathered but still deeply in love. "When Mrs. Henderson was being awful and you stood up for me." "I remember," Tobias said. "I remember thinking you were the bravest woman I had ever seen, standing there and taking that abuse with such dignity. I did not feel brave. I felt ashamed. But you should not have. That is what I wanted you to understand, that you had nothing to be ashamed of." Martha took his hand, studying the familiar calluses and scars. "You changed my life that day. You made me see myself differently." "You changed my life too," Tobias said. "You gave me a reason to stop drifting, to put down roots. To become the man I wanted to be instead of just a cowboy passing through." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the desert they had called home for so many years. The boarding house was quieter now, with fewer boarders and more space for themselves. Their children visited when they could, bringing grandchildren that Martha and Tobias spoiled shamelessly. "If you could go back," Martha said thoughtfully, "would you change anything?" Tobias considered this. "I would change Daniel dying. He deserved more years, more happiness. But everything else, all the pain and struggle that led us here, I would keep, because it made us who we are." "That is a wise answer," Martha said. "I learned from the best," Tobias replied, kissing her temple. As darkness fell, and the stars appeared one by one over Fort Yuma, California, Martha Lancaster York thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The shame, the grief, the unexpected love. The way Tobias York had looked at her in a dusty general store and seen not a barren woman, but a complete human being worthy of respect and love. "That does not make you less a woman," he had said. Such simple words, but they had changed everything. Martha had learned that her worth was not defined by her ability to have children, that she was valuable simply because she existed. And in learning that, she had found the courage to love again, to build a new life, to become the woman she was always meant to be. She looked at Tobias, this cowboy who had stayed when he could have drifted on, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Tobias replied. "Always have, always will." And that was the truth they lived by, the foundation on which they had built their life. Not shame, not other people's expectations, but love. Simple, honest, enduring love. As they went inside together to their warm, comfortable home, Martha thought about the woman she had been that hot August day in 1878, standing in the general store being publicly humiliated. She wished she could go back and tell that woman what was coming. The loss, yes, but also the love. The pain, but also the joy. The struggle, but also the triumph. She would tell that woman to hold on, to keep her head high, to believe in her own worth even when no one else did. Because the story was not over. The best chapters were yet to be written, and what chapters they had been. Full of life and laughter, tears and tenderness, ordinary moments and extraordinary love. Martha and Tobias had built a life together that honored both the man who had come before and the man who had stayed. They had raised children who knew they were loved unconditionally. They had created a home filled with warmth and acceptance. It was not the story Martha had expected, but it was the story she had needed. And as she and Tobias settled into bed that night, his arms around her the way they had been for decades now, Martha felt nothing but peace. The shame that had haunted her for so many years was gone, replaced by the certainty that she was exactly who she was supposed to be, a woman, whole and complete, loved and loving. That was the truth Tobias York had given her all those years ago in Fort Yuma, and it was a truth she carried with her always. Being childless had not made her less a woman. And now, surrounded by children and grandchildren and a husband who adored her, she understood that having children had not made her more a woman either. She had always been enough, just as she was, and that was the greatest gift of all.